Welcome to the Invite Health podcast, where our degreed healthcare professionals are excited to offer you the most important health and wellness information you need to make informed choices about your health. You can learn more about the products discussed in each of these episodes and all that Invite Health has to offer at www.invitehealth.com/podcast. First-time customers can use promo code podcast at checkout for an additional 15% off your first purchase. Let's get started.
It's very interesting. NASA, the National Aeronautics Space Administration, and other space agencies are looking into nutrients and plant ingredients to protect the astronauts in future flights, and that's becoming increasingly important because flights are going to become longer and therefore more dangerous. For instance, from what I've read, a round-trip flight for astronauts to Mars should take about 3 years. So that means there is no ozone layers. So these future Martians, they're going to be exposed to a lot of different types of radiation. They're going to be exposed to very dangerous gamma rays, very dangerous X-rays, not just the ultraviolet A and the ultraviolet B, but also ultraviolet C that we really don't get any effect from down here on Earth. Infrared. I mean, it's going to be a little toxic for them. Plus, there's no gravity. So what happens when you don't have gravity? Well, you're not pushing against anything, so you lose muscle and bone. Plus, their immune system gets damaged by the radiation. Plus, they need food. So they're looking at different things for space flight, especially in these long-haul space flights. They're looking at algae like Luglinia gracilis, a type of algae that's great for the immune system, by the way, as food for astronauts, because basically they just throw the seeds in water and this stuff grows, and it's loaded with essential fatty acids, and it's loaded with minerals, and it's loaded with vitamins, and it's loaded with things like beta-glucans for their blood pressure and their blood sugar and their cholesterol, and also for their immune system. They're looking at nucleotides, a nucleotide supplement, nucleotides with nucleosides to help protect their immune system even further from the effects of radiation. They're already using that in some space flights. They're looking at resveratrol to protect muscle. That's very interesting. And they're looking at melatonin for bone. So here's some research along that line, the Journal of Pineal Research. The Journal of Pineal Research is about the pineal gland. So the pineal gland is involved with sleep and awake and your body's internal rhythms. And that's a lot more important than you'd ever expect. Because getting disengaged from your internal rhythms, your internal body clock, which we call circadian rhythm technically, leads to many bad things. I mean, it's connected to heart disease, it's connected to diabetes, it's connected to a whole bunch of cancers, including breast cancer and more than likely prostate cancer. Some of the terrible ravages of aging are tied into a disconnect between your internal clock and your body. Poor immune system function, a lack of bone building. These are all important, obviously. And increased levels of pain in the daytime, poorer control of blood pressure, neurological damage. I mean, so this internal clock thing is really important. And one of the things that controls the internal clock is at night, melatonin. You start to release melatonin from the pineal gland. That's why a lot of research on melatonin is published in the Journal of Pineal Research. When it's starting to get dark, and that sets you up for sleep, but it sets you up for bone building, it sets you up for controlling your blood pressure, it sets you up for controlling pain in the daytime. It does a lot of things. So let's talk about this. This is a study from researchers in Japan published in the Journal of Pineal Research. Melatonin is a potential treatment for the prevention of bone loss during spaceflight. And it's about 20 academic research institutions throughout Japan, maybe 30 actually now that I look at it. And they're talking about, this is interesting, because they talk about many of the reasons why an astronaut would lose bone. Like there's microgravity, so there's no pushback. So you lose bone if you're not pushing back. And they're saying that what happens, a lack of gravity stimulates osteoclasts. Now, what's an osteoclast? It's a cell that breaks down bone. And melatonin stimulates the inhibition of osteoclasts, but at the same time, it promotes osteoblasts. Now, I'm going to discuss that in a minute because that's all to do with bone building. But first, welcome to our episode, Melatonin for Bone Building. My name is Jerry Hickey. I'm a nutritional pharmacist. I'm also the senior scientific officer over here at InVet Health. I want to thank you for listening to today's episode, joining us today. You can find all of our episodes for free wherever you listen to your podcast, or just visit invethealth.com/podcast. Please subscribe. Please leave us a review. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at InVet Health. The info on this episode is linked at the episode description, so let's get going. Let's talk about bone to begin with. When you're young, you have to remove old bone and you have to rebuild it. You have to replace it. So there's cells that remove bone called osteoclasts, and there's cells that replace the cells, rebuild the bone called osteoblasts. So when you're young, there's a balance. You're removing old bone that's becoming more brittle, and you're replacing it with new strong bone. And typically you replace about 10% of your bone per year. You remove and replace it. So over the course of a decade, you've totally rebuilt your skeleton. Your skeleton in general weighs about 10 pounds. Now, there are certain things that promote the breakdown of bone, and there are certain things that promote the building of bone. So we're going to talk about melatonin, because it pushes back on an imbalance that can lead to weakened bones, and it does it in a very good way. When you go to sleep at night, that's actually when you build bone. When you go into the deep stages of sleep, you're building bone. You're doing a lot of things. You're consolidating memories. You're detoxifying your brain. You're putting your blood pressure down a bit, and your body temperature. Hopefully that already dropped when you were going to sleep. You're doing a lot of things. You're addressing pain the next day, reducing body pain the next day, and the need for pain rescue medication like Advil and Aleve. But one of the things you're doing is building bone. And in fact, that is when you build bone. You build bone at night. Now, bone isn't just calcium and vitamin D. There's a lot of things in bone. There's protein, there's phosphorus, there's zinc, there's beta-carotene, vitamin A. There's magnesium, there's boron. All of these things are necessary. There's silica, there's vitamin K. There's also collagen. Collagen is a type of protein that the body makes in abundance when you're young. You eat any kind of protein, whether it's a piece of cheese or beans or a piece of mackerel, and you convert a lot of that protein into collagen, because a lot of your body's made out of collagen. Your ligaments, your tendons, part of your muscle is collagen. The meniscus that holds your knee up, your bones, your joints, your spinal tissue, the lining of your intestines. Collagen's used all over the place. The valves in the heart, the filters in the kidneys, the blood-brain barrier that keeps toxins out of the brain. In bone, bone is about 36% collagen. It makes the superstructure, the framework. So I always tell somebody who's treating bone loss, don't just get your calcium and vitamin D. You need other things. You have to have the vitamin K. You have to have the magnesium. But also I tell them to take some collagen. And I also put them on melatonin, which surprises people. They always, like if they emailed me, they always email, melatonin, that's for sleep. Yes, of course it's for sleep. But it's also for building bone. Here's the Journal of Pineal Research. Melatonin, another avenue for treating bone and osteoporosis, bone loss and osteoporosis. That's from researchers throughout China. And they said age-related loss of bone is related to a drop in melatonin release. They said age-related reductions in melatonin are considered to be critical factors in bone loss and osteoporosis with aging. So the truth of the matter is, they find that one way they know if a woman's going to lose bone, they check the urine. Why would they check the urine? Well, for two things. They see if collagen's breaking down. Because 36% of your bone is collagen, they'll find breakdown products of collagen in the urine, which indicates you're starting to lose bone. But the other thing they look at is breakdown products of melatonin. After you use melatonin, it's converted into other things, and that should be in the urine. So if they see a lack of melatonin in the urine, they have to be concerned about bone loss, future bone loss. So here's the journal Metabolism. It's the University of Colorado Anschutz Medical Campus. That's in Aurora, Colorado. Their Division of Endocrinology, Metabolism, and Diabetes. Penn State University over in University Park. Harvard Medical School. The Departments of Medicine and Neurology, Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston. Harvard School of Public Health. the Medical College of Wisconsin, the Division of Endocrinology and Bone and Mineral Unit, Oregon Health and Science University, and Oregon Institute of Occupational Health Sciences in Portland. So, I mean, these are really prestigious research institutions. And this is a great journal, Metabolism. The importance of the circadian system and sleep for bone health. I mean, if this doesn't hit the ball out of the ballpark, and they're saying that the evidence shows that sleep timing, so, shift work again, like nighttime shift work, can affect your bone. And the duration of how much you sleep are optimal for bone health. So if you're working shift work or if you're not sleeping long enough, it affects bone function. And once again, that's called your circadian rhythm. Your circadian genes that control your internal clock are needed to regulate bone manufacturing. So they said this review explores the evidence for a link between shift work and sleep disturbances and the duration of sleep, you're not sleeping long enough, and the quality of sleep, poor night's sleep, and alterations in bone metabolism, bone health, and bone loss. So the effects are real. And of course, what's affected by shift work? The release of melatonin. So here's archives of osteoporosis. It's looking at sleep patterns and bone loss, sleep patterns and osteoporosis. It's in Asia, so it's all different research institutions throughout Asia, and they're looking at the osteoporosis self-assessment tool for Asians. That tells you if an Asian person is losing bone, and it's 3,700 older women, an average age of 60, and they were dividing them into risk categories for osteoporosis. And they found that sleep duration was definitely affecting bone manufacturing and bone health. So they separated them to less than 6 hours, less than 7 hours, less than 8 hours, less than 9 hours. And they found if you sleep less than 6 hours a night, it really affected your bone health. You really had a much higher risk of developing osteoporosis, which once again, if you're not sleeping at night, you're releasing less melatonin, and that would be tied into poorer bone manufacturing. So here's the Journal of Pineal Research again. It's the Department of Endocrinology and Internal Medicine, Aarhus University Hospital. That would be in Denmark, and a couple of other academic research institutions. And they said, recent studies have shown that melatonin has a positive effect on the skeleton, so bones. By increasing age, the melatonin levels decrease. And then they say, that further affects bone remodeling, in other words, bone building. So they're looking into whether melatonin can improve bone health. Can it build bone? So this is a very powerful study. It's a double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled study on older women with osteopenia. It's 1 year long. They gave them either placebo, which is a fake pill. We used to call that a sugar pill in the old days. They gave them either placebo or 1 milligram of melatonin or 3 milligrams of melatonin. That's all they gave them for their bones. They didn't give them calcium. They didn't give them vitamin D. They didn't give them a drug like alendronate, Fosamax, any of those drugs. They simply gave them melatonin for 1 year or placebo. So they gave them different levels of melatonin. Now, all these women had osteopenia. Osteopenia, your bones are starting to hollow out. It's kind of like a Swiss cheese effect. So it's like a lighter version of osteoporosis. And osteoporosis at severe bone loss, you're really at a high risk of like a hip fracture or a spinal fracture. But don't make a mistake. Osteopenia doesn't mean you're safe. You still have a heightened risk of a bone fracture due to brittle bones, weakened bones. You still have a higher risk of a spinal fracture or a hip fracture or a broken wrist or a broken ankle. So it's nothing to sneeze at. So they're looking at different things like breakdown products of bone in the urine, hormones. They're looking at x-raying the bones. They call that dual x-ray absorptometry and quantitative computer tomography. So they're really taking a close look at the bones. Now, the mean age of these women were 63. So that means they're going to be between like 53 and 73. Mean age is right in the middle of the ages. Compared to placebo, they're looking at the femoral neck, the bone mineral density of the femoral neck. Now, that's where the bone of the thigh bone is inserting into the hip socket. That's where typically your hip fractures. And they found that 1 milligram of melatonin improved the bone density of the femoral neck within a year by 0.5%. That's something. But if they used a 3 milligram, it was very powerful. It increased the bone mineral density of where you fracture your hip, where you have a hip fracture, by 2.3%. I mean, that's beautiful. That's amazing. That's like almost perfectly reversing, never mind osteopenia, which is a lighter level, that's almost perfectly reversing osteoporosis. Now, looking at the tibia, the bone itself, it increased the thickness, the 3 milligram, by 2.2% in the bone mineral density. But in the spine, only the 3 milligram worked. Now, that's important. Older women that are frail, they've lost their muscle, they've lost some height, coughing can cause a spinal fracture. Just coughing can cause a little break in their spine. Or just opening a window can cause a fracture in the spine. So this is really important. The 1 milligram of melatonin didn't help the spinal bone mineral density, but the 3 milligram really had a powerful effect. It increased bone mineral density of the spine by 3.6%. In addition, the loss of calcium in the urine was decreased by over 12%, so it really was working. So 1 milligram of melatonin at night over the course of a year increased bone mineral density in the spine and the hip, not really the spine. But 3 milligrams did a great job of increasing bone mineral density in both the hip and the spine. So melatonin is really important. So here's the journal Aging. This is a really important study. It's Duquesne University School of Pharmacy. Now that would be in Pittsburgh. I would know that because I went to pharmacy school in New York and I knew the other pharmacies and pharmacy schools and pharmacists. It's the Functional Medicine Heart Preventics Clinic in Washington, Enderby Healthcare in Pittsburgh, and the Mayo Clinic Department of Orthopedic Surgery in Rochester, Minnesota. So you've got Duquesne University and you've got the Mayo Clinic. So this is and in the journal Aging. This is a great study. They're trying to rebuild bone in older women with osteopenia. They're postmenopausal. So they're trying to rebuild bone. They didn't give them calcium. They didn't. They gave them either a placebo or they gave them melatonin, strontium, vitamin D3, and vitamin K2. They didn't even give them calcium. They gave them strontium, which is a mineral, vitamin D3, vitamin K2, and melatonin. So that's powerful. So it's a 1-year, double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled human clinical trial. So just like the other study from Denmark, this is a gold standard, state-of-the-art human clinical trial. It's the highest quality study you can do. They're looking at nightly melatonin, strontium. We have strontium and strontium citrate. That's what they used in the study. Vitamin D3 and vitamin K2 on bone mineral density and quality of life in older women, postmenopausal women who've lost bone. They're between the age of 49 and 75 compared to placebo. They didn't give them a drug. They didn't even give them calcium. This is crazy. I mean, it's wild. Treatment increased bone mineral density in their lumbar spine by 4.3%. And in the femoral neck, once again, that's where the hip fractures, by 2.2%. The entire left hip was improving, not just the femoral neck, like the thigh bone. Mood and sleep quality improved for those on the supplements, but not on placebo. So here's what they're finding. They're finding that melatonin slows down the cells that break down bone, because they're still, when you get older, the cells that break down bone are still working, but the cells that rebuild bone, they've slowed down a great deal. So the osteoclasts are still removing bone, but the osteoblasts aren't replacing it, so you're losing bone. There's a net loss of bone, and that's dangerous because then you get fractures. And fractures can be really dangerous and painful and expensive to treat. So melatonin slowed down the osteoclasts. That's called osteoclastogenesis. So you weren't removing the bone as quickly, because that kind of speeds up as you age. But yet it was restoring osteoblastogenesis. The osteoblasts were rebuilding bone. So it really has a clear effect on bone. So if you've lost bone and you're older, I would take 3 milligrams of melatonin 15 minutes before bed with a little water. Another tip, a couple of other things that help bone that surprise you. One is green tea. Green tea works on rankle. Rankle after menopause increases the risk of breast cancer, but also breaks down bone. So when you drink green tea and you suppress rankle, on one hand, you're helping reduce the risk of breast cancer by about 19%, according to scores of studies. And on the other hand, you're rebuilding bone. You're rebuilding bone. And fish oils, believe it or not, fish oils have a very good effect on both bone metabolism and muscle metabolism. And when you take enough fish oils and you're older, you help retain your muscle and you help retain your bone health. So those are just some tips. In any event, thank you for tuning into our podcast, the Invite Health Podcast. You can find all of our episodes for free any place you listen to podcasts, or just visit invitehealth.com/podcast. Please subscribe. Please leave me a review. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Invite Health. I hope to see you the next time on another episode of the Invite Health Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Jerry Hickey signing off.